Retired General Louis MacKenzie is well known to people around the world. During the Balkans conflict, he commanded the Sarajevo sector and was the face of the United Nations Protective Force in Yugoslavia. He's also an author and a member of the Order of Canada.
For the first time in recorded history, individual nations comprising a military alliance are placing restrictions on what their soldiers can and cannot do before they arrive in the theater of operations. Some can't go out at night or outside the wire, some can't fight. This means NATO ends up fighting for a draw in Afghanistan, which is borderline defeatist. Our country's mission has evolved from 2002, when Canada sent a battle group of some 800 soldiers to Kandahar to fight as one-third of the combat power of a U.S. brigade. Their mission was to track down and eliminate al-Qaeda and any Taliban that supported them. As the situation in southern Afghanistan deteriorated, Canada responded to a call for help and deployed to Kandahar province over Christmas 2005. At that time, the Taliban were organized in large numbers and conventional units around Kandahar city and planning to take it back as their capital. If that happened, the three southern provinces would have fallen to the Taliban. The Canadians went forth from the city and soundly trounced the Taliban and removed the threat, and that meant the mission could evolve to classical counterinsurgency operations. That means moving into areas, spreading outwards from Kandahar city, and pushing the Taliban out. Having secured an area, the internally displaced Afghans and refugees could return to their homes, and they did so in the thousands. Security has to be maintained by NATO boots on the ground in the secured areas, as it's the local Afghans who ultimately defeat the insurgency by cutting off support to the insurgents and providing human intelligence to NATO. They will only do that if they trust NATO to stick around and protect them until the Afghan National Army can take over that responsibility. And that's the problem. Canadian troops are sorely limited in how many new secure areas they can create, as they wouldn't have enough soldiers to secure the additional areas once cleared of the Taliban. My own estimates suggest we need 10,000 more soldiers in the south, of which at least 3,000 to 4,000 should be operating with our contingent in Kandahar province. The bizarre suggestion that we would leave our Canadian battle group in the most dangerous province in Afghanistan with a caveat, and that's what it would be, that they can only fight if the enemy comes right up to them rather than preempting the enemy attack, sounds more like a Monty Python skit than foreign policy. Let's stop fighting for a draw. NATO needs to generate the boots on the ground so we can win the military component of the conflict, so development, reconstruction, and diplomacy can overshadow the military effort. Canadian soldiers have excelled and sacrificed for this mission. It's time that 1% of the over 1 million NATO soldiers available for service in Afghanistan reported for duty.
Three strong views. We brought them together. We'll hear what they have to say to each other next. Well, as you saw earlier, three strong views represented around our map of Afghanistan now. So we want to talk it through with Louis MacKenzie, Sally Armstrong, Stephen Staples. I was trying to decide who to start with first, because they're all very provocative points that you put forward. I think we got to go to rank. We'll start with the general. It's easier.
And how rank can we get? Yes.
General, it sounded a lot to me like you're talking surge. I mean, you used everything but that word, just like the Americans did in Iraq. More troops, considerably more, on the ground. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, Peter, I want to get this military mission over with and create some stability so reconstruction, governance, all of the other things that are so very important putting a country back together can happen. And right now, there are inadequate troops on the ground. I think most NATO nations recognize that, but very few are prepared to live up to the charter, which says an attack against one is attack against all. And I mean, there are over 1 million soldiers sitting on their hands in some of those countries that 1%, if they showed up, would allow us to do that. Because what we can't do now is when we go out and secure areas around Kandahar city, we don't have anybody to secure that area, to maintain the security. The Afghan National Police have had their throats cut and hung up by their heels from posts, you know, when they were left to secure it. They don't have the ability.
But is it a roll of the dice? 10,000 more troops on the ground, I think is the number you're suggesting. I mean, if that doesn't work.
Well, I'm talking about 10,000 in southern Afghanistan, doubling the force. Because when you have, overall, if you have 40,000 troops in Afghanistan, NATO troops, more than half of those aren't fighting. It's because you have 37 nations represented on the ground. Every one of them brings a national headquarters. Every one of them brings a communication link or whatever. So you really don't have that many troops.
But are those the kind of numbers that you'd have to put on the ground in southern Afghanistan? And you think that could do the job of pushing, as Sally was saying, the Taliban back to the caves or wherever?
I think that would permit you to expand your secure areas until the magic day within a couple of years where they overlap and you're providing security in southern Afghanistan. I firmly believe that.
All right. Stephen, what's the matter with that?
Well, I think that the problem is it just accepts that there is a military solution to this, and if we just do more, we'll finally get the victory that we want, that we've been trying to achieve for more than 6 years now. But I don't think it's there. I don't think the troops are there, but I think what we really need to have is a look at the overall strategy here. And is there going to be a military solution to this? And I don't think there is. I think ultimately this is going to end up in a diplomatic process. The problem is, Peter, is that, before September 11th, 2001, there was a civil war going on in Afghanistan. It was the Northern Alliance in the north, the Taliban with their base in the south, and then the global war on terror sort of got laid over the top of it. And we kind of came in on one side of that civil war. The problem was we didn't bring in a reconciliation process after the Bonn agreements in 2001 that would eventually stitch the whole country back together. And I think this civil war is still going on underneath the military mission. And until we address that in some sort of diplomatic process, we're not going to get the kind of development and human rights and governance advancement that the Manley Report envisions.
All right, Sally, you're not talking necessarily more troops. You're talking more aid, more direct influence on trying to make things better for those on the ground.
I don't care what it takes. They have to have security, because without security you can't do anything else. You can't run a government, a judiciary, a hospital, a school. You can't. So
does it need more?
We have to. Clearly what we have isn't enough, because we're not getting the job done. But coming back to what you said, I think the nuances here have to be considered. For example, the Northern Alliance had 5% of the country. The Taliban had the rest. And the ethnic struggles have decreased. They haven't stayed the same or increased. So I think that there are opportunities politically for this country to come together, in which case I would disagree with what you said. But you have to have the security. And then you have to put bread on the table. I mean, that we could have done right at the beginning. And although fighting an insurgency is new for everybody, the military didn't have a lot of information on how to fight an insurgency, but we do know about feeding people, and we should have been able to at least do the things we know how to do, that we could do, that would convince the people that help is on the way.
It's an excellent point, but and nobody says there's a military solution to this, but there's no solution without the military. I mean, that's the problem.
Well, okay,
and that's what permits the delivery of aid, etc., and which is happening, by the way, in, I say 31 provinces. You'd probably say 30. It's much better than the South.
Let me just pick up on your point, saying there's no solution other than the military, because Stephen is putting one on the table. He's not the first person to do it, but the suggestion of talking with the Taliban.
Sure.
Now, you did mention one of the issues that's been a problem. The Taliban, or the majority portion of the Taliban, say they'll talk, but not until foreign troops get out.
But Peter,
just a sec. Let me finish the point here. Would you actually argue that it's a good thing for all foreign troops to get out and then start talking with the Taliban?